The school hallways carried the same rhythm every morning, the squeak of sneakers on the tiled floors, the slamming of lockers, and the endless chatter of students comparing notes, gossiping, or laughing at jokes. And cutting through it all, almost like background noise no one really paid attention to, was the soft swish of a broom. Mr. Thomas moved slowly down the hall, sweeping up pencil shavings, candy wrappers, and crumpled notes that had been tossed aside. His gray cap was pulled low, shadowing his eyes, and his uniform bore faint stains from years of work that no amount of scrubbing could erase. He wasn't a teacher, or a coach, or anyone the students admired. He was the janitor, the man who was always there but never truly seen. For many of the kids, he was an easy target. When groups of friends passed by, they sometimes whispered, "There goes the invisible man," or snickered, "Don't trip over his broom." A few bolder ones laughed openly. "Hey, you missed a spot, old man," they'd call out, pretending to drop their trash right in front of him so he'd have to bend down again. Every word stung, but Thomas never responded. He would simply nod politely, adjust his broom, and continue his work. The truth was, he had grown used to the sound of mockery, and over the years, silence had become his shield. But what the children never noticed was the quiet strength behind his tired posture. Every day, he woke before sunrise, catching the early bus to ensure the school hallways were spotless before the first bell rang. Every night, long after the last student had left, he walked the empty corridors alone, turning off lights and making sure every classroom was safe and clean. The world only saw him bending over with his broom, but no one knew that he carried a weight much heavier than a dustpan. He was a father, and behind every tired sweep was the thought of his daughter, Lily. Lily was the reason he kept going when the laughter grew loud. She was the reason he never snapped back at the insults or let his pride get in the way of his work. At home, in their small apartment on the edge of the city, Lily would always greet him with a smile and her sketchbook in hand. "Daddy, look what I drew today," she would say, her eyes shining as she flipped the pages filled with wild imaginations, towers that touched the clouds, creatures that looked half real and half magical, and streets that twisted like ribbons. Unlike the students who saw only a janitor, Lily saw her father as her hero. As Thomas swept through the noisy hallways, he thought of her sitting by the window, pencil in hand, creating worlds far greater than the one they lived in. That thought gave him strength. He didn't need the students' approval, nor did he crave recognition. All he needed was to get through the day, quietly, patiently, until the bell rang and he could head home to where his real treasure waited, not money, not status, but the joy of watching Lily's imagination take flight. One warm summer evening, the city was alive with excitement. Banners hung across the streets in preparation for the annual festival, food stalls were being set up, and children were chasing each other under strings of glowing lanterns. From their small apartment window, Lily watched the bustle below with wide eyes. Her father sat at the kitchen table, his hands tired and rough from another long day, but his gaze softened as he looked at her. Lily had her sketchbook open, her pencil moving rapidly across the page. She wasn't just drawing for fun. When she sketched, it seemed as though she could see into the bones of the city itself, mapping out its hidden veins and breathing life into every line. On this particular evening, her imagination ran wild. She drew the city's skyline first, the tall towers reflecting the last rays of sunset. Then her pencil traced lines that dipped below the surface, forming intricate tunnels and twisting sewer pipes that connected one street to another. She shaded cracks in the walls of the tunnels, dark spots that looked weak, as though they might give way if too much pressure pressed against them. Her father leaned over her shoulder and smiled. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," he said softly. "Looks like you know this city better than the people who built it." Lily grinned but kept her eyes on the page. To her, the drawing wasn't make-believe, it felt real, like her pencil was uncovering secrets hidden beneath the ground. As night fell, dark clouds began to gather over the city. The air grew heavy, and a low rumble of thunder echoed across the rooftops. Soon, rain poured down in sheets, hammering against the windows. Lily pressed her face to the glass, watching the streets glisten under the streetlights as puddles formed faster than usual. Her father turned on the television, where the evening news interrupted its cheerful festival coverage with a breaking story. Flash floods were beginning to overwhelm parts of the city. Reporters showed footage of rising water creeping up sidewalks, cars stranded in the middle of intersections, and panicked residents hurrying to higher ground. At first, the officials assured the public that the city's drainage system could handle it, but as the minutes passed, their confidence began to falter. Emergency responders were being dispatched, and engineers scrambled to identify the source of the flooding. "It's not just the rain," one reporter said urgently. "Something is wrong underground. The water isn't draining the way it should." Thomas's eyes shifted from the television to Lily's sketchbook lying open on the table. His breath caught in his throat. The map she had drawn earlier that evening, those tunnels, the cracks she had sketched in darker strokes, they looked eerily similar to what the news anchors were describing. He pulled the sketch closer, studying it under the dim light of the lamp. The sewer lines Lily had drawn weren't random, they matched the city's layout with uncanny accuracy. "Lily," he said slowly, his voice tight with unease, "how did you know to draw these?" She looked up innocently, twirling her pencil between her fingers. "I don't know, Daddy. It just came to me." She shrugged, then added, "The pipes looked weak. I thought they might break." Thunder cracked outside, louder this time, as though punctuating her words. Thomas looked back at the news. Streets were already waist-deep in water in some districts, and emergency crews were losing valuable time trying to locate the exact points of failure in the sewer system. His pulse quickened. The officials had no idea where to begin, but his daughter's sketch might hold the answer. In that moment, Thomas felt a shift inside him. For years, he had been dismissed, mocked, and overlooked, treated as though his work made him invisible. Yet here, in the hands of his daughter, lay something extraordinary, something that could mean the difference between chaos and safety for thousands of people. He closed the sketchbook carefully, gripping it like it was more valuable than gold, and knew what he had to do. Rain hammered the city with unrelenting force as Thomas hurried through the flooded streets, clutching Lily's sketchbook against his chest. The water splashed around his boots, soaking through, but he didn't slow down. His heart pounded with urgency. Every instinct told him that the answer to the city's crisis was right here in his hands. As he reached the barricaded downtown square, he saw flashing red and blue lights cutting through the storm, emergency vehicles, engineers, and city officials. Huddled together under tents, panic was written across their faces. He pushed forward, calling out over the downpour, "Wait, I think I can help." But the first officer who saw him frowned and shook his head. "Sir, this is restricted, please get back to safety." Thomas held out the sketchbook, the pages already speckled with raindrops. "No, listen, my daughter drew this, she knows where the cracks are underground. This can save you time." The officer glanced at the soggy paper, then at Thomas's soaked janitor uniform, and sighed. "We don't need children's drawings right now. Please, let the professionals handle this." For a moment, Thomas felt the sting of humiliation burn through him. It was the same dismissal he had lived with for years, being brushed aside, unseen, unheard. But then he remembered Lily's small voice, so sure when she told him about the weak spots. He tightened his grip on the sketchbook. He couldn't give up. He pushed through the crowd again until he spotted a group of engineers bent over maps and tablets, their faces creased with frustration. "We can't find the breach," one of them muttered. "The system's too old, half of these blueprints don't even match what's down there." Thomas stepped closer, raising his voice. "Maybe this will help." He opened the sketchbook, showing them Lily's map. At first, one of the engineers scoffed, "Is this some kind of joke? We don't have time for..." But then another man, older, with sharp eyes, leaned in and studied the drawing. His brow furrowed. "Wait," the older engineer murmured, tracing the pencil lines with his finger. "This shows pressure points along the tunnels. Look here, the shading marks align with where the system is weakest. We've been sending crews in circles, but this..." He looked up sharply at Thomas. "Where did you get this?" Thomas swallowed hard, rain dripping from his cap. "My daughter drew it, she just saw it." For a moment, silence fell among the group. Then, almost reluctantly, the older engineer barked an order, "Cross-check this with our reports." Now, the other engineers moved quickly, comparing the sketch with live data from the flooding sensors. Their eyes widened as the pieces lined up. Lily's drawing wasn't random. It was more accurate than anything they had on file. "Get a team to this sector immediately," the engineer shouted, pointing to one of the darkened areas on the sketch. Radios crackled to life as orders were relayed. Trucks roared down the street, their headlights cutting through sheets of rain. Thomas stood there, drenched, his chest heaving. For the first time in years, people were looking at him, not with disdain or mockery, but with something else. Respect, gratitude. The same officials who would never have noticed him sweeping their floors were now depending on the paper in his hands. As the crews rushed off, the older engineer turned to him. "If this map is right, you may have just saved this city." Thomas shook his head and smiled faintly. "Not me," he said. "My daughter." The storm continued to rage overhead, but for the first time, hope flickered in the eyes of those around him. The storm stretched into the night, but the frantic energy of the rescue teams never slowed. Guided by Lily's sketch, engineers and workers waded through waist-deep water, hauling equipment, sealing breaches, and rerouting the flooding. Hours passed like minutes as crews followed the pencil marks that a little girl had made on an ordinary page. And just before dawn, when the first light of day began to soften the clouds, the water finally stopped rising. Pumps kicked in, draining the streets, and the danger that had threatened to swallow entire neighborhoods was finally under control. The city was saved. News spread like fire. Reporters flooded the square where the officials had gathered, microphones raised, cameras flashing. They all wanted to know how, after so many hours of confusion, the breakthrough had come. Thomas stood off to the side, soaked to the bone, the sketchbook still in his hands. He didn't seek attention. Years of being invisible had made him almost comfortable in the shadows. But this time, the spotlight found him. "Sir, is it true you provided the map that saved the city?" A reporter called out. Thomas hesitated, then gave a small nod. "It wasn't me," he said firmly. "It was my daughter." At that moment, Lily appeared, clutching her raincoat around her small frame. She had begged to come after seeing the chaos on the news, and now she stood nervously by her father's side, her sketchbook hugged tight against her chest. Cameras swiveled toward her, the little girl who had done what no adult could. One of the engineers stepped forward and addressed the crowd. "Without this drawing, we wouldn't have known where to start. Her sketch gave us the exact locations of the weaknesses in the sewer system. Thanks to her, we were able to stop the flooding before it destroyed half the city." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some of the very people who had once mocked Thomas, the parents, the students, even teachers from the school, were now watching in awe. Their laughter seemed so far away now, replaced by shame and admiration. A reporter crouched down to Lily's level. "Sweetheart, how did you know how to draw all of this?" Lily blushed and whispered, "I don't know. I just saw it in my head." The reporter smiled warmly, but Thomas's eyes grew misty. He reached out and gently squeezed her shoulder, pride swelling in his chest. As the morning sun broke through the clouds, painting the city in gold, a new narrative began to form. The janitor who had been overlooked for years was no longer invisible. And his daughter, the quiet girl with a sketchbook, was celebrated as the unlikely hero who had saved thousands of lives. Officials promised to honor her contribution, and neighbors who had once looked past Thomas now approached him with gratitude and apologies. Some even lowered their heads, remembering how they had laughed at him for sweeping floors, never realizing the strength and brilliance hidden in his home. Yet Thomas didn't gloat. He stood tall, his arm around Lily, and when someone asked what it felt like to finally be recognized, he answered softly, "Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes, they just carry pencils, or brooms." His words carried through the crowd, striking deeper than any headline could. That evening, back at their modest apartment, Lily returned to her window seat with her sketchbook. She began drawing again, her imagination as endless as ever. This time, though, she wasn't just a child with a pencil, she was the girl who had saved a city. And Thomas, watching her with quiet pride, no longer felt like the invisible man. He was exactly what he had always been, the father of a remarkable daughter whose gift had changed everything.